Welcome to Madlik. My name is Geoffrey Stern, and at Madlik we light a spark or shed some light on a Jewish text or tradition. Along with Rabbi Adam Mintz, we host Madlik Disruptive Torah on Clubhouse every Thursday and share it as the Madlik podcast on your favorite platform. This week's Torah portion is Yitro. The Torah uses two words that describe the orientation of the Israelites towards Mount Sinai, Neged and Tachtit. We survey the interpretation of these words in the rabbinical tradition to shed some light on the revelation and even to critique synagogue architecture. So join us for The Shadows of Sinai. Well, welcome back to Madlik. It's the beginning of spring. We are looking at the shadows changing, and tonight we are going to be talking about the shadows of Sinai and really focusing on just two verses and a few words in those verses that all relate to the disposition, the position, the orientation of the Israelites when they accepted the Torah. So in Exodus 19:2, it says, having journeyed from Rephidim, they entered the wilderness of Sinai and encamped in the wilderness. Israel encamped there in front of the mountain. And the Hebrew is Vayichan Sham Yisrael Neged Hahar. In front of the mountain, opposite the mountain, Neged is a word that we're going to explore. So as usual, we're going to go first to Rashi. And Rashi says that Neged means to the east. For wherever you find the word neged referring to a locality, it signifies with the face towards the east of the place mentioned. Now, I don't know how you extrapolate facing east from the word neged, but I certainly see this as a clue that we're going to be talking about tonight more than just facing the Mount of Sinai. Any Jew knows that when we Jews pray, we face east. Any Jew knows that when we construct and set up a synagogue, we place the Torah, the focal point of the synagogue is facing east. So I don't know if you have an insight into why Neged means east, but I do feel, and I'm curious whether you agree, Rabbi, that here he's giving us a little bit of a hint of what lies at stake here and what we're going to be talking about.
There's no question about that. East, east of Eden, the idea of being east, that seems to be the direction, the main direction in the Torah. So Neged Ahar means that they faced east. That meant that was the right direction to face. Mount Sinai was to their east, I guess was to their right. The reason that east is considered to be the premier direction is because if you face north, then east is to your right. And in the tradition, to your right is always considered to be the more powerful or the better direction. So that's where the idea of turning east comes from.
Well, and definitely the sun rises in the east,
right?
So it's a place of new birth, of positivity, and as you say, this kind of sense of the Garden of Eden and beginnings there. But as usual, Rashi is only one opinion, and the Ibn Ezra comes in, and he says, "Nah, I don't really agree with you." He says there is a verse in Numbers 2:2. That says, round about the tent, mineged saviv la'ohel moed. So again, like Rashi, he kind of understands what's at stake here. We're not simply talking about a moment in history, the revelation at Sinai. There is a clear connection between that revelation in Sinai that happened in a place, in a time, and the movable temple. And then ultimately, I guess you could extrapolate and talk about the temple and the synagogue. And this is a major moment. And what he's saying is that since the same word mineged is is used with the tabernacle, and there another word is used in addition to it, mineged saviv, that they were pitched round about the tent. So we surely have established that, or at least with these two commentaries, we're talking about more than Sinai.
Right, that's for sure.
So now we go to our old buddy Shadal. And Shmuel David Letzato, he focuses on another word in our verse. So if you recall, when I started, I said, Vayichan Sham Yisrael Neged Ahar, that the people encamped opposite the mountain. And he is now focusing on the word Vayichan. And Vayichan, Israel Vayichan, Vayichan is in the singular. So he says that Ibn Ezra and the Ramban, who we haven't quoted, but we'll take Shadal's word for it, say that it should have said Vayichnu, that they camped there. But the reason, according to the Ramban and the Ibn Ezra, that it says Vayichan is because the Yechidim, the elite, the heads of the tribes, the elders, encamped around it. And the Shadal says, and boy, oh boy, he says, and that is Hevel, that is hot air. Pretty strong language. He says, because although speaking about the people in a singular language, it is not intended to speak about a few of them, but on the contrary, the intention is to speak about the whole people in terms of their being all as one body. And then he goes on to say that they camped against the mountain, which means that the mountain was a center for them all, and they all turned to it, and here they were one association and one body. So now he adds...
Go on, because they all had their eyes and hearts on that mountain.
Beautiful, beautiful.
Right? That's a good end. You didn't bold it, but that's a good end.
Yeah, and the Hebrew is Heim Aguda Achat V'Guf Echad. Aguda means a circle, if I'm correct.
Correct.
They were one circle and one body. And he goes on, if you want to talk about a verse where every word has significance, it says, Vayichin Sham Yisrael Neged Ahar, and he says the name of Israel as opposed to the people of Israel or Bnei Yaakov is used because all the people were as one man against the mountain. So Shadal does a very good job of tying up these last 5 words of our verse in saying...
But he doesn't really explain the word neged. Unless
I take it that he does, because he talks about that they were around it. Agud acha. So I'm going out on a limb here, but
even
I
though
am taking...
say it, you're saying he assumes it.
Yeah, so if I had to bet, what he is doing is he's combining the sense of the Ibn Ezra that we came across in the Ibn Ezra, that they were around the mountain, with the fact that they were as one, as you beautifully quoted, their eyes and their hearts were focused on the mountain of God. So he does, in my mind, kind of tie it up really, really nicely into something that is rather beautiful.
That is nice. That's really nice. So neged is Vayichan Sham Yisrael Neged Hahar, means they were around the mountain, not opposite it. Opposite creates a distance, but around means you're really close to it. That's really your point. It's very much different than Rashi.
It's different than Rashi, who says it's easterly, but what I take from Rashi and what I take from the Ibn Ezra, who comes up with the concept of around, is we're all talking about more than Sinai. That's where I think they all agree, that we're talking about Sinai, we're talking about Mishkan, we're talking about temple, we're talking about our places of worship even up to today. So whether you faced east in a synagogue, if that's one orientation, or whether you surround something in the middle and you're all facing it together, whether it's a conflict between the two positions or it's a kind of looking a refraction of the two dispositions, I don't know. But I do think that it's amazing how in these 5 words we've come across so much just in the sense of where things are oriented, where intentions are, what was happening at that magical moment.
Fantastic. The Shadal is fantastic.
So at the end of last week's segment, where we talked about dissonance, we really talked about the beginning of division within Israel. My good buddy Yochanan came on, and he told, and I did put it I left it in the podcast. He talked about a great Hasidic rabbi who actually quoted this verse, how at the moment of revelation, Israel was one. And the rabbi, in a very beautiful, cynical, but smiley fashion that only a Hasidic Rebbe could say, is, you know why it said they were together as one then? Because the Torah wasn't given yet. Once the Torah was given, all hell broke loose. Everybody was a rabbi.
Funny.
Everybody had a different opinion. So this was this verse that he was commenting on, and I think it obviously rings very, very, very
I
true.
love it.
So as long as we're talking about dissonance and we're talking about the word neged, I bring in 2 different references that I would love to add to give context to what was happening at that moment in Sinai. And I want to go back to Genesis 2:18 when God creates woman. And he says, it's not good that man is alone. I will make him a helpmeet. And the word that is used is ezer kenegdo. Ezer is like Ezra, it is help. And kenegdo, the commentary or the translation that I have from Fox is a counterpart for him. But as we all know, the famous Rashi says, Zachar Ezer, lo Zachar kenegdo lehilachem. If a man merits it, his wife will be a help to him. And if he doesn't merit him, she will be opposed to him and fight him. And I love this sense of keneged. That neged is obviously in counter-distinction. It can mean facing the mountain, keneged the mountain, but obviously neged also has a flavor of opposing. And Rashi brings out that opposition. And I think if you take that Rashi and then you look at the giving of the Torah and maybe what should or does happen in a synagogue, you have this potential for dissonance. You have this sense of agreement under some circumstances, but maybe either because you have shortcomings or possibly because you take the word so seriously, you have an opposition to it. How does that resonate with you?
I want to make it even stronger. According to the Rashi, lo zacha kenegdo lehilachem, neged actually means opposite in a sense of distance. Vayichan sham Yisrael neged hahar, that because of the holiness of the mountain, they needed to create distance from the mountain. It's the opposite of Shadal.
I believe that, and I think it's great. You know, it reminds me of the Alter from Slobodka, I believe, a great Musernik. And I think I've told this story before, but he came over to a student, and the student was about to say the Kriyat Shema, the Shema, where you accept the Ol Malchut Shemayim, the yoke of heaven. And he says, have you ever said Shema? And the student looked at him in dismay and said, Rebbe, I'm just about to say Shema. I say it twice a day. I say it before before I go to bed. And the Alter returned to him and says, and you accept upon yourself the old Malchut Shemayim, the yoke of heaven? And he goes, of course, Rebbe. And he says, and have you ever felt like rebelling? And there was quiet. And then the Rebbe says, well, then you've probably never said the Shema in your life. And I think the lesson here that I take away is Keneged Ahar, there has to be a level of dissonance. If you accept everything just completely and without any intentionality or tribulation or a reflex, then what are you really accepting? And I think that comes out
That's
here.
a great story. Yeah, that really says it. I think that's great. That you need to have some dissonance. You just have to. And that's what Keneged means.
So the other reference I think of is, and we started talking before the podcast about Purim is coming and Pesach is coming, and one of the key points in the Seder is the 4 children, and it says Keneged Arba Banim Dibra Torah, that the Torah spoke. In my translation, it says corresponding to 4 sons. But certainly if one thinks of the wicked son, and some people even think about the wise son, or certainly the son who does not know how to speak, it's clear that the Torah is speaking in a way to create a reaction. Especially if you look at the son who does not know how to speak, it says, you talk to him, maybe it's the mother. Somehow or other, the Torah is trying to elicit a reaction. And in that regard, Keneged can have another nuance. Yes, it is one of dissonance, but it's also one of positive bringing on a conversation, bringing on a difference of opinion so that you move forward. It's a conversation.
It's great. I mean, that's absolutely great. Keneged Arba'a Banim. Neged. Neged there means that you look someone in the eye. You engage. I think the word you use is you engage them, right?
Absolutely. And I think what's fascinating is if we take it back to Sinai, and that's what I'm trying to do. Right. I'm trying to take back. There's no question, Rabbi, I think you'll agree with me, that this verse in and of itself doesn't merit a whole lot of discussion. I mean, we all know Vayichen Sham Yisrael Neged Ahar, that they encamped opposite the mountain. Move on.
That's great.
But it's the rabbis and our tradition who saw this as an opportunity to bring all of these the discussions that impact our life till today, and maybe, and we'll see if we're successful, maybe one of the messages of tonight's discussion is that Sinai has to impact you at every moment, at a personal level, at a historical level, for it to be a real revelation.
Good. I like it. I think that's great. And I think that seeing it in the word neged is really good. Keneged, right? There's some kind of conversation and some kind of dissonance means that's the tension here is how much dissonance there is. How much, how close is it, like Shadal says, and how far is it like the Keneged idea, right? In Lo Zacha Keneged. That's the challenge.
Yep. So as I said in the intro, there were 2 words that relate to the orientation of the Israelites to Sinai. And the second one occurs in our parsha at Exodus 19:17. And it says, Moses led the people out of the camp towards God, and they took their places at the foot of the mountain. So it says, Vayotze Moshe et ha'am likrat ha'elokim min ha'machaneh, vayityatzvu mitachtit ha'har. So the words that we are going, first of all, if you think about it, likrat Elokim, if we go to synagogue tomorrow night and we listen to the words of the Lecha Dodi, we will surely pick out Lecha Dodi likrat kala. Likrat rings of to greet, to go out and greet. Moses led the people out of the camp, likrat Elokim. Elokim to greet God. And one of the translations, and I love some of the translations that you get in Sefaria, it's the Rashi Chumash by Rabbi Shraga Silverstein.
I love
and it. Says, and Moses took out the people towards God. In parentheses, he writes, who was coming towards them as a groom to a bride. From the encampment, they stood at the foot of the mountain. So here already, and I assume there are commentaries that make this parallel, that pick up the sense of likrat. But in a sense, we quoted Rashi a second ago about using neged to describe familial relationships, relationships between a couple. Here we pick up on that. And because we said a second ago that they were at the foot of the mountain, tachtit really means underneath, mitachat, the mountain. Lahavdil, the word for tuchis, is tachat. This is underneath the mountain. So here we almost have an image of the mountain being a chuppah and the Jewish people being married to their Eze Kenegdo under the mountain.
It's a great image. Obviously, they've made a lot of this image, but it is a great image, right? That we were under the mountain. So you say it's a chuppah, but obviously the other tradition is that there's some fear of being under the mountain, because if you're under the mountain, then bad things could happen.
You're sounding a lot like
might fall on your head.
You're sounding a lot like Eze Kenegdo,
right?
Like,
it might just fall on your head, so you better be careful.
So the Rashi that we have, I don't know what Rashi, the Mitzuda, the Rashi Chumash by Shraga Silverstein was referring to, but our Rashi picks up on the Midrash that you refer to, Rabbi, and it says a Midrashic explanation is that the mountain was plucked up from its place, shenitla shahar mimakomo, and was arched over them as a cask. So they were standing mitachat, beneath, under the mountain. And this comes from the Mechilta and from the Talmud in Shabbat. So in Rashi's short little takeaway from that midrash, he doesn't get into what the story was between picking up the mountain above them. You, Rabbi, have gone a little bit further on in this story. But if you just look at Rashi and you put it in combination with the previous explanation, you could make a sense that there's nothing scary about this. There's nothing threatening about it. That he held over them like a Gog, really. V'nifcha alehem kigigit. Kigit is very similar to the word Gog. And that's another image that we have very quickly after we move and segue from opposite. Now we have underneath.
Right. And that's right. Kigigit. It's the idea of a gog. You held it over them as a threat. Now that's a whole different thing. One thing is keneged. The other thing is the idea that actually, God is threatening us. That if you accept the Torah, good, and if not, I'm going to drop the mountain on your heads.
So you are referring to the Talmud in Shabbat 88a.
Right, correct. So I'm jumping ahead.
I promise I am going to get to that.
Okay,
but
you will. I wanted to make sure.
Okay, you wanted to keep me honest tonight. So I wanted to stop here because I think there's a possibility that Rashi is picking just this thing and let us savor it for a second. Now, if you look at the notes, there is a wonderful article that I quote on the synagogue that was built by Frank Lloyd Wright in 1954. And the article compares it to synagogues from Poland that were built hundreds of years before. And I really, please go look at the source sheet to see this article and to see the images.
That is actually fascinating that's so. that it's so similar. That's a great article.
Well, it's not only similar, but even
Jewish
if
Review
you
of
look,
Books. Oh, it's right here. Okay, great.
Especially if you look at the synagogue from Poland,
Right.
it is truly, there's no question about it, and it doesn't. It photographs like it's massive, as if it was the Frank Lloyd Wright. I understand it isn't even that large.
Oh, really?
I do believe that some models have been built of it, and I believe even in the new museum in Poland, called Polin, they have a model of the synagogue. But you are truly, as you walk in, you are walking under Sinai. The synagogue itself is built like Mount Sinai. And I think from an architectural translation of the verses that we just discussed, there's not only that you are underneath this, it's not a dome, it's a mountain, no question about it, but the other aspect that comes out clear in the article was that the bema was in the middle. Now, Rabbi, you were once a rabbi at Lincoln Square Synagogue, and that was called the shul in the round, if you speak. It was all around that center bema. But I would love you to confirm, I wasn't able to find a source for this, but when I grew up in the yeshiva world, we think that the Orthodox movement in Europe, especially Eastern Europe, argued with Reform about theology, and they did, argued about women's roles, and they did. But one of the most major arguments that they had was, where is the bema? Where is the Torah read from? Because in the Reform congregations, they followed the model of the churches, and they put all of what the clergy was doing up on a stage up front. And the rabbis, again, I'd love to hear what you have to say, Rabbi, were as vehement against that change as anything else.
You've just told the story. It's amazing because tomorrow morning I give a class in Maharat and I'm learning the laws of shuls, of synagogues. And we're talking exactly about this. Exactly what you said. In 1840, they built a synagogue in Hamburg called the Temple. And one of the changes in the temple was that they moved all the action to the front. They moved the bima to the front because that's the way the church had it, that everything happens in front. And the rabbis, the Orthodox rabbis, were vehemently opposed to that. I mean, you'd think it's not a very big deal, but they basically said that it was absolutely prohibited from going into that shul. It's interesting. The other thing they changed was that the sermons were delivered in German. Now, it's not like the sermons used to be delivered in Hebrew. The sermons were never delivered in Hebrew. The sermons were delivered in Yiddish. But Yiddish was a holy language to them, and they thought that it was totally disrespectful to deliver the sermons in German.
But I want to talk about the language of the architecture and the form. And the rabbi who was working with Frank Lloyd Wright, the one thing, and everybody knows that Frank Lloyd Wright did not listen to the people he was building his edifices for, but he asked that the bema, where the Torah would be read, would be deep in the heart of the congregation. And that's a quote. And Wright referred to the place where the congregation was as an auditorium. And Rabbi Cohen said that where the bema would be would influence synagogue architecture for years to come. I do not know if that's the case, if it was the Wright synagogue that influenced it, but I can tell you, and my synagogue in Westport, Connecticut, has just gone through a renovation. And yes, as in the Wright synagogue, you can move a bema to the middle of the synagogue, but it's not permanently there. And I can tell you that one lesson that we learned from today and from the portion, and we're not going to have time, Rabbi, to get to the mountain above their heads was a threat. We're only going to talk about the mountain above. and the bema in the middle as the standard that was set by Sinai. And I can tell you that there is nothing more important than having the Torah as the centerpiece, where those eyes that you described from Shadal are all focused on the same place in the center, where every congregant is at the same level and there are no yechidim, where there is this healthy dialogue, sometimes even dialectic and debate between us and the Torah, but it's all there in these two verses, and I think it is very powerful.
And in these two words, and I think that's great. Thank you very much, Geoffrey. The sources were amazing today. And I think it gives us a new perspective on the experience of revelation, of receiving the law. Want to wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom. Enjoy. It's an amazing parasha, an amazing story. And we look forward to seeing everybody back next Thursday night. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
Shabbat Shalom. And Rabbi, you have to keep me to my word. We will come back to how to get
This is a great Gemara. We won't miss it.
We'll get to it.
We'll
Shabbat
get to it. Shabbat Shalom, everybody.
to everybody.